The ANC has postponed Jacob Zuma's disciplinary hearing amid fears of violence. In an email addressed to Ralph Mgijima, chairperson of the party's National Disciplinary Committee, Secretary General Fikile Mbalula says the party has been advised not to have activities, including disciplinary hearings, which could attract large crowds. Mbalula says, based on an assessment of the security situation at Luthuli House, such activities will be held after the 2024 general election. Political analyst Asanda Ngoasheng joins us now to weigh in on this issue. Asanda, good morning and thank you so much for your time.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
Now, the ANC has previously enjoyed support from crowds. I mean, be it court hearings, be it rallies, and even previously when we've seen past disciplinary hearings, Ace, Supra, Julius. Why is there security concern around this particular disciplinary hearing of the former president, Jacob Zuma?
Well, I think the issue is that Jacob Zuma and the MK party in particular have been threatening violence at every point that, Jacob Zuma has been asked to be held to account for various of his accusations that he's been facing, and also when he's been challenged. We've also seen the same MK members who have been known to say and make statements like, if Jacob Zuma is not on that ballot, then South Africa is going to have to answer for it because there won't be an election, and other such utterances. And so I'm not surprised that, it's got to a point where there are security concerns.
Yeah, but it's interesting because now we know that a lot of the threats came from, excuse me, the former Youth League political leader of the Umkhonto weSizwe party, who has now been removed from that position. So can it still be said that there is a security threat?
Well, I don't think he's the only one who has made these utterances. We've got two members or two members of the party, former and current, who have been, accused of inciting violence because of their utterances. And this is not, those two members are the ones who one would argue maybe have said the most insightful things, but the MK members have been, since this election period started and since they've been, declared as a political party that's standing, have been basically alluding to the fact that they will use violence, they will use any means necessary in order to get what they want. And I think this is why the ANC, the last time I checked, they said that they were considering or looking into the idea of having the DC happen virtually so that you can avoid the issue of crowds and you can avoid the issue of any potential violence due to Jacob Zuma having to appear.
All right. And Asanda, just maybe the threat of violence or perceived threat of violence aside, do you think there may be other forces at play when it comes to this apparent decision that the ANC has taken?
Well, I think that, the ANC is basically having a situation where its chickens are coming home to roost. They have developed and created this man who is beyond reproach, who has never been held accountable for Nkandla, for state capture, and for any of the myriad of accusations that he has been facing, both morally and legally. And so now they're in a situation where they are having to deal with the monster that they created. And I think, secondly, what's happening is that, to my mind, the ANC is actually being quite cowardly because they need to deal with this issue of Jacob Zuma head on, whether there is going to be a hearing virtually or there is going to be a hearing physically. There has to be a hearing and he has to go through the process, because you'll remember that he's already been summoned and not appeared once. And so if he is summoned and doesn't appear twice, that certainly sends a very strong message. And you'll know that Jacob Zuma has been summoned, and not appeared. And that's how he ended up with a jail sentence. But I think for me, what's most important, and I've been saying this for quite a while, is that people keep thinking that this is a Jacob Zuma versus MK or an ANC versus MK situation. Whereas actually what's happening at this point is that the ways in which the MK has built built itself to be a rogue, a political party of rogue elements in South Africa, we are seeing a situation where it's becoming the MK, Jacob Zuma, and whoever else is his supporters against South Africa and South Africa's democracy and the democratic tenets that exist in South Africa. And I think that, we cannot allow a situation where anybody, Jacob Zuma or anyone in this country, is going to be somebody who we need to fear, who we need to make to be unable to make decisions because we are scared of the kind of crowd that he can rally up, as we saw he's capable of in having rallied up a crowd in July when he was supposed to be arrested, that led to South Africa spending more than 50 billion rands and more than 300 lives being lost due to somebody simply refusing to go to jail for having, defied the court. And I think that most importantly, South Africa and, of course, particularly the ANC is being reminded that governance is not, South Africa is not a monarchy. So any kind of governance that happens is a social contract between South Africans and the government of the day. And so for everything that South Africans do, we do it voluntarily because we are entering the social contract. And the minute there are rogue elements who are not following the same laws that everyone else has to follow, who are not even interested in engaging and building the democracy that we have all fought very hard for, then you have a problem in that you begin to encourage other people in the system and other South Africans to stop following the law, to stop doing what they are supposed to do in order for the country to be able to continue to be the country that it is and to be able to move into the future. And so if you cancel a DC because you're scared of fears and you don't go ahead even with the virtual, what you effectively are saying is that there are some people who are allowed to behave in ways that can threaten this democracy, in ways that can threaten any ability of holding them accountable. And trust me, tomorrow it's not just going to be Jacob Zuma that we're concerned about. Any other person will be able to raise hell and will be able to incite violence to get their own way. And unfortunately, we already have this culture developing. We see in townships that we have, these so-called protection gangs who are demanding money from people, and the police are simply doing nothing about it, and people are living in fear. And so this culture has already started to embed itself in South Africa, where people just make up their own rules as they will, and people just engage in violence in order to get their own way. Now, we remember in South Africa that pre-1994, there was a lot of violence, there was a lot of threats of violence, and this almost destabilized and ended the possibility of South Africa going to the election. And I fear that the culture that Jacob Zuma, that the MK and everybody involved in this particular political party is trying to create is that very culture of uncertainty, that very culture of fear, which is counter what South Africa is known for. And we, for the longest time, have been one of the few countries on this continent who are able to have free and fair elections without the fear of violence. And he and his people have reintroduced the fear of violence that we last saw and felt in 1994. Because, of course, safety is not only about having, directly been harmed. It's also about the psychological state that you put a nation in, particularly when you're going into elections. You need people to feel safe. You need people to feel they can vote for whoever they want and they can make whatever decision is right for them, so that the social contract continues and people are able to hand over governance to leaders that they choose as democracy demands. Otherwise, you just have a monarch where people decide that they are the chosen ones and they will govern regardless of what the people have to say.
I think this not only speaks to the amount of power that Jacob Zuma still yields within the ANC, but perhaps even in the country in general. And I wonder, what difference does it even make to postpone this DC to after the elections? But I want to hear from you, Asanda. What impact do you think that this is having on the public perception of the ANC?
Well, I mean, I think, as I said earlier, that first of all, people are beginning to see the ANC as cowards, because why are they unable to deal with one man? It doesn't actually matter how many skeletons he may have or how many secrets he holds of the ANC or individuals within the ANC. At this point, the ANC is choosing itself to the detriment of the country against one individual. And that is a very dangerous place for us to be as a country. And then secondly, as I've said also, that, safety is not just about, being safe from imminent direct violence. It's also about being safe from psychological safety. I mean, having a sense of psychological safety. And at this point in time, South Africans do not feel that psychological safety. We are not sure that when we go into elections, that they will be free of violence. We are not sure that if the IEC follows to the letter of the law and removes the MK, or the Constitutional Court decides Jacob Zuma can't stand because of the laws that are in place, governing people who have been in prison before and sentenced, we can't be sure psychologically and in the real world, in the real sense, that he is going to face the music. We've seen already as South Africans, Jacob Zuma get away with using taxpayers' money to build Nkandla, which, by the way, I was just thinking about this, that when Jacob Zuma built a bunker, we all thought it was such a ludicrous idea in a peaceful South Africa, high crime and violence because of crime, yes, but peaceful in the main. We didn't understand that he was obviously, at this point, I'm beginning to believe that he was planning the kind of chaos that we have seen, that he was planning potentially the kind of violence that we have seen starting with July 2022, which by many has been called the taster for what could happen in South Africa if one man doesn't get his way. And that's not a good place to have an electorate that's going into an election feeling. And that's not the kind of message I will be sending. We should be sending both at a local level, at a national level, and even at a global level. And for me, it's very disappointing that the ANC doesn't seem to understand the urgency of solving this issue, doesn't seem to understand how critical this is for ensuring that there are free and fair elections. Because whether the DC happens now, happens after election, whether Concord rules or doesn't rule, eventually at some point, Jacob Zuma is going to have to be held account. And what will happen if we leave things until after he has been elected and is now the head of an MK that has X percentage of the vote, and therefore X number of South Africans that they can legitimately claim are behind him? That's going to be an even more difficult situation than the situation now, where Jacob Zuma has been voted by nobody, and Jacob Zuma doesn't have quantifiable support besides the signatures, which I would even argue came before his candidacy for this political party had been declared and affirmed.
Asanda, thank you so much for your time. And it remains to be seen. Jacob Zuma is reportedly seeking legal advice on this letter that's also doing the rounds on social media. That was political analyst Asanda Ngoasheng just weighing in on this issue, and we'll see what happens.